Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we're going to completely flip everything you thought you knew about language learning totally upside down. Seriously, if you've ever spent hours just staring at a textbook, feeling like you're memorizing math formulas rather than learning how to actually talk to real people, you are in the exact right place.
Let's start with a feeling I think we all know a little too well. Why doesn't memorizing grammar actually make you fluent? You know the drill. You spend weeks memorizing verb conjugations, building this perfect mental spreadsheet that just completely crashes the second you step off a plane in a foreign country and try to order a simple cup of coffee. You freeze up. The rules are in your head, but the words just will not come out of your mouth. It's incredibly frustrating. But today, we're going to look at exactly why that happens and, more importantly, how we fix it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the language problem. Second, the procedural solution. Third, Prabhu's subconscious view. And finally, 3 classroom tasks.
All right, part 1, the language problem.
So, for decades, there's been this deep historical frustration with traditional grammar-heavy syllabuses. The fundamental issue is that what teachers teach isn't necessarily what students actually absorb. And the root of this problem really comes down to a clash between two things: the product and the process. Traditional syllabuses were completely obsessed with the product. You know, the final outcome, the grammar rules, the massive lists of vocabulary you were supposed to just know by the end of the year. But modern second language acquisition research tells us we've been looking at this totally backwards. We actually need to focus on the process. We need to look at how the human brain naturally learns and acquires language through real, authentic communication. Just selecting and arranging grammar items in advance, that can actually distort the brain's natural learning process.
And this brilliantly illustrates a point made by language expert H.G. Whittison. He said, many people confuse means and ends. The end goal, the product, is obviously to communicate effectively in a new language, but the means, like how we actually get there, shouldn't just be grinding through endless grammar drills. Different syllabuses might have the exact same goal of building good communicators, but forcing students to memorize rules before they ever get to speak, that is often the entirely wrong means to that end.
Which brings us to part 2, the procedural solution.
Enter the hero of our story today, a process-oriented approach that finally bridges that gap between what we want to achieve and how we naturally get there. So, the crucial point is, what exactly is a procedural syllabus? Well, instead of organizing a course around a rigid list of grammar rules or vocabulary, a procedural syllabus is organized entirely around meaningful tasks that students perform. Grammar literally takes a backseat. This approach forces students to use the language to solve problems, exchange information, and perform real actions. You aren't just learning about the language anymore, you're actively doing things with it.
Now, you might be wondering, if you're a procedural syllabus designer, how do you actually build this thing? Well, there are 3 absolutely crucial planning tasks you have to tackle in order. Step 1 is a needs analysis. You have to get out there and literally observe or survey exactly what your learners need to do day to day. Step 2 is the specification of real-world goals based on that analysis. You're deciding what these learners should be able to do out there in the real world. And only then do you reach Step 3, which is the specification of learning tasks. This is where you finally choose the actual activities students will do in the classroom to practice those real-world skills.
But here is the ironic part. The traditional planning tasks, things like the specification of linguistic content, topics and themes, performance objectives, these are the exact things traditional language teachers spend all their time obsessing over. But for a procedural syllabus designer, these are literally the least important elements. The focus is always on the task and the process, not some rigid checklist of linguistic themes.
Let's move to part 3 and see how this builds into Prabhu's subconscious view. To really understand this deeply, we need to look at the famous Bangalore project led by N.S. Prabhu. This project provided the incredible psychological backing for this entire process-oriented method. Prabhu had a truly groundbreaking view of the procedural syllabus. He believed that students absolutely do not learn a language best by studying grammar rules one by one. In fact, he argued that teaching grammar directly or assigning endless textbook exercises is actually the worst way to develop language ability. His core philosophy was that grammar should develop naturally or subconsciously. Think about it. Just like a child learns to say, "I went to school yesterday," without ever once studying past tense rules, adult learners can naturally absorb grammar when they use the language to understand meaning and complete real tasks.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this theory of the mind is essentially the Trojan horse of language learning. You give the conscious mind a highly engaging task, like solving a problem, figuring out a puzzle, or understanding a specific message. And while the conscious mind is entirely distracted and super busy trying to complete that task, your subconscious mind is secretly in the background noticing grammar patterns, learning the rules, and building an internal understanding of the language. You're basically tricking your own brain into learning grammar.
All right, bringing us to part 4, 3 classroom tasks.
So how do we actually put Prabhu's theory into practical application? We need to look at the exact types of classroom tasks that keep the conscious mind perfectly distracted so the subconscious can get to work. Prabhu introduced 3 very distinct types of pedagogic classroom tasks designed specifically to trigger this subconscious learning. Now think of these tasks as an investment. Students might not do these exact specific puzzles in the real world, but they're practicing and investing in their cognitive skills right now, so that later on they can communicate successfully in completely unpredictable real-life situations. Let's look at these 3 types.
The first one is the information gap activity. This happens when one person has information that another person desperately needs. To complete the goal, they have absolutely no choice but to communicate in English to share or collect that missing data. It creates this genuine, pressing need to speak.
For example, let's say one student has a map and another needs directions. Or one has a train timetable and the other really needs to know when the train leaves. Or maybe 2 students each have half of a story and they have to talk to each other to piece the narrative together. They aren't just reciting boring textbook lines, they're forcing themselves to communicate for a real, immediate purpose.
So that's the first type. The second type is the reasoning gap activity. Now this one is a pure mental workout. You're basically tricking students into doing math or logic puzzles in another language. It asks students to think carefully, use logic, and deduce entirely new information from the clues they already have sitting in front of them. It improves both their critical thinking and their language skills at the exact same time.
Bring these examples to life in your mind for a second. Imagine a classroom of students passionately debating clues, acting like detectives trying to figure out who is telling the truth in a mystery scenario. Or maybe they're just stubbornly arguing over bad map directions to find the absolute best route for a road trip. They are so focused on solving the puzzle and outsmarting the problem that they completely forget they're even speaking in a foreign language. The conscious mind is totally occupied, and the subconscious is just soaking up all that grammar.
And that brings us to the third and final type, the opinion gap activity. This task asks students to express their own personal ideas, opinions, or feelings. And honestly, the beauty of this one is that there's no single correct answer. It really empowers students to use the language to express their unique identity and their own personal views. You might ask them things like, which city is the absolute best place to live and why? Are school uniforms really necessary? What was your favorite movie this year? By asking open-ended questions with no right or wrong answers, you completely remove that paralyzing fear of using bad grammar. It is so incredibly liberating for a student. The focus shifts entirely away from accuracy and right onto passionate, authentic communication.
So, to bring this all together, a modern, process-oriented syllabus doesn't force you to choose between the final goal and the method. It actually integrates the product and the process beautifully. By prioritizing meaningful tasks over rote memorization, it builds real, confident communicators. You learn the language by actually using it, which makes total sense, right?
So, I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought. If your subconscious mind truly learns grammar best when your conscious mind is completely distracted by a problem, how are you going to redesign your next learning task? It's time to stop studying the rules and start solving problems. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes the way you look at language learning.